welcome back to my channel. My name is Stacey and I'm answering the 21 questions of or I'm sharing the summary of the answers to the 21 questions in my 21 questions journal. I'm doing this because every year at the end of the year, beginning of the year, I do a self-reflection process, and my self-reflection process is 21 questions, and I journal about them, and they set the tone and the intention for my life. And so what I started doing, because so much changed rapidly this year in my life in terms of like getting engaged and becoming pregnant, and just there were just so many changes that I wanted to reflect on the answers that I had written at the top of the year to see if I needed to pivot or change anything as it relates to me going into the rest of the year, so that way I can better prepare for the year that is coming with the baby and a husband and all of these different things. And so we are on question 13, not necessarily because of the order, but just that's how many I've gotten answered is 13. And I actually want to skip to the very end of the journal, the very last question in the journal, which is one of my favorite questions. All of these obviously are my favorite questions, or they wouldn't have been a part of this process that I've been doing for almost 2 decades. But I think this one is probably my most favorite question because it really gets to the heart of like, why do the self-reflection process in the first place? Why, like, yeah, why do the process in the first place? I think it gets to the heart of that. And so it's under the leisure area. And remember, inside the journal, a part of the technology is these questions are divided among your areas of life, so that way, as you are reflecting on your life, you are touching on all of the areas of your life, so that way you can actually intentionally create the life that you want. And so the very last question in the journal, under the leisure area of life, is what do you really, really, really want? And why? And yes, those reallys are in there. I know I could have just said, what do you really want? But I wanted to emphasize the point of like, no, what do you really, 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 really want? Because I think as adults, so many of us don't know how to answer the question about what we want, and we don't know how to be honest with ourselves. And this is one of the most important questions in the whole journal, because if you're going to create something, you want to know what that thing is that you're going to create. But if you don't take the time to sit down and think about what you want, it's less likely that you'll be able to create what you want. And I think so many of us are unsatisfied with our life because we are not intentional about creating the life that we want. And we're not intentional because we either don't know what we want, or we won't put it down on paper. Like, we won't allow ourselves to know consciously what we want. Like, we know unconsciously, and sometimes we'll be conscious of it, but we'll throw a little joke in there, to dismiss it or whatever. And it's just like, no, you just need to let yourself be conscious of it. And I think, and this is something that I had shared when I originally answered these questions, that like, there are probably 4 reasons why people don't really, really, really know what they want, or they're unwilling to reflect on it or process it. And one of it is because wanting gets a bad reputation. From the time that you're a kid, if you were raised anything like me, it's kind of like, if you wanted something, it's like, oh, you're so ungrateful, you just had this. Or if you had siblings, and let's just say you wanted more of something, it's like, oh, well, you need to share with your siblings, it's not only for you. Like, right, like there is this, if there was, for me in my experience, if there was a specific want expressed that was different than my siblings, or there wasn't enough for my siblings, it was almost like this pushback of like, you are wrong for wanting an excess portion or a larger portion. And then this like overwhelming sense, even as a professional, that like, if I went into work and I wanted a raise, or I wanted a different office, or I wanted a specific client, or I wanted this, that it's like, oh, you think you're this, you think you're that, that you should just get whatever you want. Yeah, like, right, like, but I say that I'm using those as examples because from all the way from childhood into professional years, this idea of wanting is associated with it being a negative. And I think it being a negative because there's this presumption of entitlement or ungratefulness or lack of satisfaction. And it's like, no, wanting doesn't mean I'm ungrateful. You guys know I'm the most grateful human being on the planet. Doesn't mean I'm ungrateful. It's a desire. It's just an expressed desire. But because wanting has such a bad reputation, it's like You don't need it, so it's not important. And it's like, oh, I didn't say I needed it. I said I wanted it. There's a difference there, and that's okay. I think it's also that wanting is a very vulnerable thing. Yes, need is vulnerable, but need tends to have a universal feel to it. So even in its vulnerability, because so many other people can connect and relate to it, you don't experience maybe some of the like exposure that you feel when you express your wants. Wants are very vulnerable because they're so unique. Like what I want as a Black woman, as a, you know, a bit entrepreneur, as a mom, as a pregnant person, like all of these things, what I want is so specific and personal to me. You can get somebody with my exact same demographics, but they still might not want exactly what I want. But generally speaking, we may share a baseline level of needs, right? So wants don't get talked about and don't get acknowledged because there's so much vulnerability attached with acknowledgement of that. I think the other thing for wants is that, and this is where I was for a very long time, like when I go back and I read my journals, especially in my early 20s, it's like I didn't know what I wanted, but I didn't know what I wanted because I was in survival mode. And here's the thing, if you are in any level of survival mode, whether it is through actual trauma, like how I was, it is a financial state of survival mode, just any level of survival mode, what happens is that doesn't allow for imagination. It doesn't allow for as much creativity. It doesn't allow for imagining of things. And so oftentimes when you're in survival mode and somebody says, what do you want? Your brain doesn't have the capacity to think about what you want, because all it has the capacity to do is process what you need. So it's like what oftentimes ends up happening is a lot of people will express what they need as a want. And so it'll be like, oh, what do you want? And people will say things like, I just want a good meal and a roof over my head. If you respond that way, it's a really good indication that you're in survival mode. Now, don't let me disrespect or take away your true desires, right? Because someone could want a good meal and a roof over their head, but meals and shelter tend to be needs as opposed to wants. Now, if the meal you wanted was a very specific type of meal and the type of shelter that you wanted was a very specific type of shelter, okay, maybe that's more on the desire want side. But oftentimes when people are talking like that, they are expressing a need disguised as a want because their brain cannot get past the survival mode that says, I need a roof over my head, I need food in my belly. Or sometimes you'll hear people say that, they'll be like, oh, I don't want for anything, I don't need for anything, I'm blessed, I'm highly favored, I'm good. I'm like, right, like these are people who are in such a state of survival or such a state of I can't remember what the word is, I lost it, pregnancy brain, but that their mind won't even allow them to conceptualize it, right? But that's your imagination, your creativity is suppressed or stunted because you are in a state that won't allow it. So sometimes we can't even access it because the needs are too great. That is a very real thing. And then last but certainly not least, I think sometimes we can't figure out what we want because we are so used to identifying what we don't want and that being the trigger for what we want. But just because you don't want something doesn't mean you have clearly identified what you want. So for example, if we think about like this bookshelf behind me, like I could have said, oh, I don't want I'm trying to think of something else you could put books on. What else can you put books on? I don't want a table. Like if I said that, I was like, oh, I don't want a table. That doesn't tell you that I want a bookshelf. Or even if I was like, oh, I don't want the bookshelf with the glass in it. And you guys will remember when I was working with the first interior designer, I was very much in a I don't want phase. I couldn't identify what I wanted. And so she had picked out this bookshelf for me and I was like, oh, I don't want a glass bookshelf because my books are going to be too heavy. And she was just like, oh, okay. So then she sent me a different type of bookshelf and she kept sending me all these types of bookshelves, like all these different forms of bookshelves. And I was just like, oh yeah, no, I don't want this one because I don't like the industrial look, and I don't want this and I don't want this. And yes, the more I said what I don't want, the closer we kind of got to what I did want, but that she never was able to identify what I want because all I kept telling her is what I don't want. And what I wanted was a built-in bookshelf with the pop of color. That's what I wanted, but I didn't know how to express that that's what I wanted. And so I kept saying, oh, I don't want this type. I don't want this. I don't want this. And you see this a lot when Women are talking about the type of man they want. Like you'll say, oh, what type of man do you want? And it's like, well, I don't want this and I don't want this and I don't want this. And it's like, okay, you haven't told me what you want. You just told me what you don't want. It's like, what do you want for Christmas? Oh, well, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. Well, okay, you haven't told me what you want. You have told me what you don't want. And we are overly identified in the things that we don't want because we are overly identified with the experiences that have made us unhappy, with the experiences that have frustrated us, with the experiences that have overwhelmed us. And again, going back to the idea of being in a state of survival, you couple those experiences plus being in survival, and it's really hard for your brain to lock in and say, oh, I want this, and then write it down and reflect on it. All that to say, there are two things that I wanted last year. There are two things that I wanted last year. I'm only going to share one because I just want some privacy as it relates to this. But this one that I'm going to share, I think is very relevant because I got it. So in that way, this is a bit of a manifestation journal as well, like when you're reflecting. And what I wrote down is I want more humans. I want as many humans as my body can as my body can produce. I'm assuming that's what I meant there. As my body can produce in a healthy way, 2 to 3 more humans to raise and share with society, to have with my husband, to have with my partner, blah, 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 blah. To raise I'm trying to skip over some stuff. To raise humans, to nurse humans for my breast, like blah, blah, blah. There's stuff in here. That's just my words. But my point is something that I wanted when, and I did this journal at the end of last year. So I was like late November, early December. No, I think I was like early December when I was writing these answers down. And I wrote what I wanted was more humans. And I ended up actually getting pregnant. And that is incredible because I think, and I would have to go back in my journals to see how many times I wrote down that I wanted more humans. I know that there was one other time that I wrote, I want more humans. But I was in a relationship, and I was in a relationship with someone who didn't want as many humans as I wanted. And so I think I was writing it down to remind myself that this is truly what I want. But I would love to go back in my journals to see how many times I wrote down like what I really, really want is more humans or more kiddos. But I think last year when I was writing this down, and I can even remember at Christmas talking to my sister about it, and I'm just like, I just really want, more humans. I want to have more kids. And she's just like, okay, well, if that's what you really want, like, that's what you pray for, that's what you wish for. And I'm like, yeah, that's going to be like my dominant, like, intention, prayer, hope, et cetera, et cetera. And so to come into this year and to get pregnant and to be able to have this experience, like, it's the most amazing thing in all the land. Like when I look at the answer to this question, and I'm just like, even if you go to my Instagram and you look at the video, you can see like I'm just, in comparison to the size that I am now, like I was so small, and I'm just like, yeah, I just want some more humans, like, right? And it's just like, I remember being there and not necessarily in that moment being in a position, or I can't say not in a position, but I wasn't pregnant. I'll say that. I remember wanting this without being pregnant, if that makes sense. Whereas like now I want this and I am pregnant, and it's like, oh my goodness, you really get to create the life that you want. Like you really last year said that what you wanted was more humans. And now this year you are pregnant and you are creating a whole entire human. Like, does that not blow your mind that you can write something down, right? And you can be like, this is what I want. And then it's there. And I wrote more stuff around it, like, why? And I think because my friends and some of my family members have asked, because they're just like, your son is grown. You sure you want to start over? Yada, yada, yada. And I mean, obviously, yeah, we're here now. They understand that I said what I said. I meant what I meant what I said. But it's like, yeah, like I've never been one of those people that's just been like, one and done, or I don't want to start. Like, no, like I've always been like, I want 1,000 babies. And when I say 1,000, I mean 5. And like, and even as I've gone through this pregnancy, I would love to have more. And also, I am taking stock of how my body has responded to this pregnancy, how this pregnancy is, impacting things, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, like I'm so excited that last year I was like, what is the thing that I really, really want? And giving myself the space to want that, letting myself be vulnerable on these pages to like write it all out and write what it means to me. Like all of that is like really important, and letting myself know that it's okay to want more children. Because I think and this is something that would come up too, like when I would tell people, oh, I want to have more kids, they would just be like, you should be grateful you only have one, or you should be happy that you already have one. Like, especially when I was in my early to mid 30s, where friends or associates who had not had a child at all, and they were in the trying to have kids season of their life, and we would talk about it, and I would say, yeah, I can't wait till I have more kids too. And they would be like, oh, but you don't have anything to worry about because you already have one. Or, if it never happens, at least you had one experience. And it's just like, yes. And also I want more experiences. I want more. And I think it was just something very difficult for people to wrap their mind around. And so to be here, maybe almost 12 months since writing this down and saying that this is what I want, and it like fully manifesting into a beautiful, pregnancy. And like, I'm gonna have a daughter. Like, and I didn't write that down, whether it was like a boy or a girl, just because I wanted multiple kids. So to me, which one I had didn't matter as much as just me being able to have more. And I don't know, to be here now is just really quite remarkable, and I'm very excited about it. And so that is question 13 in terms of how many questions I've answered on the channel, but it is the last question that is in the journal. And I just wanted to share that with you all. So my question to you is, what do you really, 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 really want, and why? And make sure you take the time to write it down in as much detail as possible, because if you're anything like me, you can be a few months out from what is like within the same year of just manifesting exactly what you want. And I want that for you as you intentionally create a life that makes you happy. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.